He didn't hear the explosion. He felt the sky tear open around him. One moment, he was fastening his seatbelt, listening to the quiet hum of the engines, watching sunlight dance across the clouds. The next, a flash of white fire swallowed the cabin. The blast hit like a sledgehammer, ripping metal apart, hurling passengers into the air, and transforming a peaceful flight into a screaming vortex of chaos. His ears rang, his vision blurred, his entire body shook as the plane split open, exposing the passengers to the roaring, frozen sky. Oxygen masks whipped like torn flags. Loose objects flew past him like bullets. In that horrifying instant, he realized one truth. The aircraft was no longer flying, it was dying. But something inside him refused to surrender. Even as the cabin tore apart, even as pressure dropped and gravity snatched everything into darkness, he clung to life with every ounce of strength he had left. Fire, smoke, free fall. The world became a blur of terror and noise, yet somehow through forces no human could control or explain. He survived long enough for fate to decide whether he would live or fall from the sky forever. He woke up that morning with no sign that fate was about to test him in ways no human should ever endure. The airport buzzed with the usual noise, rolling suitcases, boarding calls, impatient travelers tapping their feet. He moved through the crowd with the same invisible routine every passenger carried. Check the ticket, drop the bag, pass security, find the gate. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing warned him that he was walking toward the most defining moment of his life. When he stepped onto Flight 237, he didn't know he was stepping into a story people would someday call impossible. He slid into his seat, nodding politely at the elderly man beside him. A young mother across the aisle rocked her child. A group of students laughed quietly in the back. It was a normal flight. Comfortable, predictable, safe, or so everyone believed. As the plane climbed, sunlight bathed the cabin, turning the windows into glowing frames of the sky. He glanced outside, mesmerized by the endless blue. The engines hummed rhythmically, a sound that usually brought comfort. Flight attendants handed out water, passengers adjusted their seats, and the world felt calm. Calm enough to hide the danger brewing deep within the aircraft's systems. Unseen by every pair of eyes inside that cabin, a tiny electrical fault had begun to spark. It was buried behind panels and wires, invisible but deadly. One of those small mechanical betrayals that wait silently until the perfect moment to strike. The pilots had no alerts. The instruments showed nothing unusual. Everything looked normal. But inside the control cables and insulation, heat was slowly building. He leaned back, scrolling through photos on his phone, thinking about the life waiting for him at his destination. Plans, people, promises. The kind of thoughts someone has when they believe tomorrow is guaranteed. The passengers chatted, laughed, slept, unaware that they were flying toward a moment that would tear their world apart. And then, at 33,000 feet, the first warning sign appeared, not to the pilots, not to the passengers, but deep in the electrical heart of the aircraft. A tiny spark, a small burst, a signal of the disaster that was seconds away. The calm before the storm was counting down. The explosion did not sound like thunder. It sounded like the sky itself screaming. 1 second. Everyone on Flight 237 was wrapped in the soft comfort of routine. The hum of engines, the clink of seatbelts, the quiet laughter of families. And then, without warning, a violent flash tore through the rear of the aircraft, turning calm into chaos in less than a heartbeat. The blast ripped open metal as if it were paper. A wall of fire punched through the cabin, throwing passengers upward, sideways, against seats, against ceilings. The floor vibrated so violently it felt like the entire aircraft had been struck by a giant hammer. Plastic panels shattered. Overhead bins burst open. Luggage shot out like missiles. Oxygen masks whipped down, tangled and useless in the frantic windstorm exploding inside the plane. The pressure dropped instantly. Air was sucked out with a roar so loud it drowned out every human scream. A hole had ripped open near the back, wide enough for people to be pulled straight into the sky. The young mother who'd been comforting her child was now gripping the seat with both hands, trying to hold her baby as the wind threatened to tear them apart. The elderly man beside him clutched his chest, gasping for breath. Every passenger was fighting a battle they never prepared for. He felt his seat shake violently, his vision flickering as the plane pitched downward. The cabin lights blinked on and off, illuminating chaos in flashes. People floating, objects spinning, flames crawling along the torn metal edges. The smell of burning wires and fuel filled his lungs. His ears rang so fiercely he couldn't hear his own heartbeat. The aircraft entered a deadly spiral. Gravity slammed them into their seats, then lifted them again as the plane tilted. Loose objects were no longer just flying. They were slicing through the air with lethal speed. A laptop smashed into a window. A metal tray hit the ceiling. Screams mixed with the roar of wind and the crackle of fire. It felt like the world had become an unending nightmare. His seatbelt was the only thing keeping him from being thrown into the chaos. He grabbed the armrest with white knuckles, but even then, the force of the descent was overpowering. A woman across the aisle lost her grip and was hurled upward, slamming into the overhead panel before tumbling back. A child cried for his father, but the noise swallowed every voice. The pilot tried to regain control. He could feel it in the sharp, jerking motions of the aircraft, but the explosion had severed key systems. The plane was broken, wounded, falling fast. A second blast, smaller but deadly, shook the cabin again, sending another wave of debris into the air. Through the smoke, he saw something he would never forget. The rear section of the plane tearing away completely, disappearing into the open sky like it had never existed. And with it, passengers were pulled out into the freezing blue void, their silhouettes swallowed instantly by the clouds below. The plane was no longer a machine. It was a falling coffin. And he was still alive inside it, for now. He didn't remember the exact moment the plane broke apart. All he remembered was the sudden silence that followed the chaos. An eerie, terrifying quiet that didn't belong at 33,000 feet. When he opened his eyes again, the world was no longer metal, seats, and passengers. It was open sky. Endless, freezing, merciless sky. And he was falling straight through it. His seat, still attached to a twisted, jagged slab of the cabin, tumbled violently in the air, spinning so fast the clouds became a blur of white and blue. Wind slammed against his face, stealing his breath, freezing his tears before they could fall. His chest burned from the pressure. His fingers were numb. His body shook uncontrollably as gravity dragged him downward at terrifying speed. He tried to scream, but nothing came out. The force of the air crushed his voice. His mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. The ground so far below it looked like a painting. Forests stretched like green waves, mountains pierced the horizon like stone knives, and he was rushing toward them with no parachute, no protection, no hope, just a broken seat and the last strands of fate holding him in this world. Time fractured in strange ways. Seconds felt like hours. His thoughts raced through memories he never expected to see again. His mother's voice calling him for school, the smell of his father's workshop, the way the sun felt on his face during summer walks, the promises he made but never kept. Every memory hit him like a reminder that life was slipping away with every foot he fell. But somewhere, deep inside the panic, a strange clarity formed. A survival instinct humans rarely touch until death is staring them down. He forced his eyes open against the wind. He searched for anything familiar, anything he could use. He noticed the cabin fragment he was strapped to was acting like a crude, unstable wing, slowing his fall ever so slightly. Not enough to save him, but enough to give him seconds he desperately needed. He shifted his body weight, trying to stabilize the spin. The cold cut into him like knives, but he didn't stop. He pressed his legs against the broken metal, using the seatbelt as leverage. For a brief moment, the spin slowed, just enough for him to breathe, just enough for him to think. Below him, the forest grew larger, dark, dense, endless. And then the realization hit him. If he landed in open ground, he would die instantly. But the trees could break the fall. They could slow the descent, branch by branch, second by second. It wasn't a guarantee, not even close. But it was the only chance he had. His heart pounded so violently he felt it through his entire body. His fingers dug into the torn seatbelt, his eyes locked on the forest. He whispered the only thing he could. Not yet. Not like this. And then the fall entered its final deadly stage. The forest rose toward him like a dark, living ocean, violent, unwelcoming, but somehow his only hope. As he plummeted toward the canopy, the wind howled louder, the cold bit deeper, and every instinct inside him screamed that the end was seconds away. He braced himself, clutching the shattered armrest until his knuckles turned bloodless white. He didn't know what would break first, the trees, the metal, or his bones, but he understood one thing with absolute clarity. This was the moment that would decide life or death. The first impact was like being hit by a speeding truck. A thick branch tore straight through the metal frame beside him, splintering into sharp fragments that stabbed into his arm. The force jerked his body so violently that his vision exploded into white stars. Before he could even process the pain, another branch slammed into the cabin piece, spinning it sideways with a deafening crack. Leaves, bark, and wood shattered around him like exploding glass. The forest didn't slow him gently. It attacked him, branch after branch, each one ripping away another chunk of metal, another piece of his seat, another breath from his lungs. A jagged limb snapped across his ribs, knocking the air out of him. Another branch struck his leg with bone-bruising force, sending a sharp electric pain shooting up his spine. Blood ran down his forehead, blurring his vision as the world spun in wild circles. But with every violent collision, the forest was doing exactly what he hoped. It was slowing him down, breaking his fall, saving his life in the most brutal way possible. Then came the final, bone-shaking crash. The remaining chunk of the cabin slammed into a massive tree trunk, folding like crushed metal foil. His body lurched forward, the seatbelt digging deep into his chest, stopping him from being thrown out into the forest floor. The sound of the impact echoed through the trees before fading into an eerie silence. For a moment he didn't move. He couldn't. Pain radiated from every part of him, chest, legs, back, arms. His ears rang. His breaths were short and broken. Every inhale felt like fire, every exhale like glass. He tasted blood in his mouth. He felt something warm and sticky down the side of his face. His right leg refused to respond. His left arm throbbed with a deep, sharp ache that made him lightheaded. But he was alive. Against every law of nature, every prediction, every statistical probability, he was alive. He tried to call out, but the forest swallowed his voice. No one would hear him here. Not now, not soon. The silence felt enormous, swallowing every sound except the faint rustling of leaves settling around him. The world felt both peaceful and terrifying. Peaceful because the nightmare of falling was over, terrifying because he was now completely alone, injured and stranded. He forced himself to move, biting down on a wave of pain strong enough to make him dizzy. He unclicked the seatbelt with trembling fingers and slid out of the broken metal shell. His feet touched the forest floor with a cold shock. His wounded leg buckled instantly, sending him crashing to the ground. He gritted his teeth, grabbed onto a tree root and pulled himself upright. The forest around him looked endless, towering trunks, thick undergrowth, shadows stretching in every direction. The smell of sap, dirt, and damp leaves filled the air. Somewhere far above, sunlight barely pierced the thick canopy. He took a breath, sharp and painful, and started moving. Crawling first, then limping, then dragging himself over fallen logs and broken branches. Every inch forward was a battle. Every step was a reminder that he should not be alive. But he kept going, because surviving the fall was only the beginning. Now he had to survive the forest. He didn't know how long he had been walking. Minutes, hours, maybe longer. The forest was thick enough to swallow time and silence alike. Every step was a negotiation with pain. His right leg dragged behind him like dead weight, throbbing with each movement. His ribs ached with every breath, sharp reminders of the brutal descent through the trees. His vision blurred in and out, the edges darkening whenever exhaustion threatened to pull him under. But still, he moved. Because stopping meant dying, and he was not ready to hand himself over to death, not after surviving the sky. The forest floor was uneven, tangled with roots and wet leaves. He stumbled frequently, catching himself on branches that scraped his palms raw. His body trembled from cold and blood loss. A metallic taste lingered in his mouth. His shirt was torn, soaked with dirt and streaks of dried red. He felt his strength leaking away like water through cupped fingers. But the will to live pushed him forward. He followed faint signs of openness, slightly brighter spaces between trees, whispers of wind that suggested he was moving away from the densest part of the jungle. Once he thought he smelled smoke. Once he thought he heard a distant engine. Each time the hope jolted him awake, gave him a burst of energy, only to dissolve into disappointment moments later. Still, hope, even false hope, kept him from collapsing. He finally reached a small clearing where the sunlight actually touched the ground. He sank to his knees, breathing in short, shallow gasps. His entire body shivered, not from cold alone, but from the slow realization of everything he had lived through. The explosion, the fall, the forest, the loneliness. He wanted to scream for help, but his voice cracked the moment he tried. Only a weak, broken sound escaped his throat. But fate wasn't finished with him. Far above, a distant hum rolled through the sky. He froze. At first, he thought it was just wind playing tricks on his ears, but then the sound grew louder, steady, mechanical, unmistakable. A helicopter. His heart thudded painfully. He forced himself to stand, gripping a tree trunk as the ground wavered beneath him. He stumbled into the center of the clearing, waving his arms despite the agony shooting through his shoulders and ribs. He shouted, or tried to, even though his voice barely rose above a rasp. The helicopter hovered, uncertain, searching. He tore off a piece of metal from the wreckage still tangled around his waist and angled it toward the sun. The reflection flashed, weak but sharp enough to catch attention. The helicopter slowed, turned, and then began descending toward him. The moment he saw the rescue team running toward him, his legs finally gave up. He dropped to the ground, tears mixing with dirt. Hands gripped his shoulders, voices called out to him, someone wrapped a blanket around him, but their words were muffled, distant, fading. He felt himself slipping away, not from fear, but from relief. The last thing he remembered before everything went dark was a rescuer whispering, almost in disbelief, "He survived the fall. He survived the sky." And for the first time since the explosion, he allowed himself to let go, because he had already done the impossible. He had lived.